Duke Alistair Pembroke did not merely take the glasshouse from his wife. He summoned 40 tenants to watch Marianne surrender its key to his sister, and suspended the money she would need to defend herself. Lady Lavinia Pembroke waited at the top of the glasshouse steps, one gloved hand extended. "The key, Marianne," Alistair ordered. The brass pressed into Marianne's palm. She had carried it for 6 years, ever since her marriage settlement allowed her to transform the abandoned orangery into a botanical laboratory. Inside, she had developed hardier wheat for the tenant farms, cultivated medicinal plants for the village infirmary, and raised 12 rare orchids entrusted to her for the Queen's forthcoming exhibition. Now 3 of those orchids were dying. Lavinia claimed Marianne's experiments had poisoned them. "You have not examined my records," Marianne said, "nor have you allowed anyone independent to inspect the plants. I have seen enough. You have seen what your sister wished you to see." A murmur moved through the assembled tenants. Alistair's expression hardened. "The medicinal beds may also be contaminated," Lavinia announced. "Until the danger is understood, nothing grown under the Duchess's supervision can be distributed." "That garden uses a separate water supply," Marianne replied. "Every remedy sent to the infirmary is recorded and sealed." Alistair stepped closer. "Do not make this more humiliating than it must be. You gathered the estate to watch you condemn me. The humiliation was your intention." For a moment, anger broke through his composure. Once, he had admired her refusal to flatter him. In recent months, especially when Lavinia was near, every correction had become an insult to his authority. Alistair removed a folded document from his coat. "Until the Crown completes its inquiry, you are forbidden to practice botany on Pembroke land. The glasshouse, its specimens, and its records will pass into Lavinia's custody." Marianne read the order. Near the bottom, she found another clause. "My settlement payment has been suspended. That is temporary. That money pays my assistance and supports my widowed aunt. Without it, I cannot hire a solicitor or commission an independent examination." Alistair said nothing. Then Marianne noticed the date beside his signature. "You signed this yesterday, before the second orchid showed any sign of illness." A few tenants exchanged uneasy glances. Alistair could still have paused. He could have inspected the irrigation records, or asked why Lavinia had prepared Marianne's punishment before the supposed contamination had spread. Instead, he pointed to the key. "Give it to her." Marianne looked through the misted panes at the rows of plants she had raised. Years earlier, Alistair had stood beside her as the first glass panel was fitted and told her that no one would ever again confine her intelligence to a drawing room. Now he was taking that promise away before an audience. She placed the key in Lavinia's hand. A flicker of satisfaction crossed Lavinia's face. "Then, everything that happens inside from this moment forward belongs to you," Marianne said. Lavinia's fingers tightened around the brass. By evening, Marianne had been removed to the dower cottage at the edge of the estate. Her clothes and instruments were delivered under guard, but her research notebooks remained in the glasshouse. Lavinia claimed they belonged to the Pembroke estate. Alistair had allowed her to keep them. Marianne was wrapping her microscope when someone struck the cottage door. Thomas Reed, one of the tenant farmers, stood outside, carrying his 11-year-old daughter. Clara's face burned with fever, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. "The infirmary refused her," Thomas said. "Lady Lavinia ordered them to destroy every remedy you supplied." Marianne's anger gave way to alarm. When did the fever begin? She was well at supper. Then she woke crying about someone inside the glasshouse. Marianne carried the child to the fire and prepared a cooling infusion from the small personal supply she had been permitted to keep. As she loosened Clara's clenched fingers, a crushed flower fell onto the blanket. It was an ivory orchid marked with thin crimson veins. Marianne went still. It resembled one of the Queen's rare specimens, but it was not one of hers. "Where did you find this?" she asked. Clara's eyelids fluttered. "Behind the furnace. Did you see who left it there?" "A lady came after the man had gone. She told him to hide the pots beneath the stone." "What lady?" Struggled to focus. "The one with the silver bird on her glove." Marianne looked down at the orchid. Earlier that morning, a silver bird had been embroidered across each of Lavinia's gray gloves. Once Clara's fever eased, Marianne carried the flower to her microscope. A thin binding thread was concealed beneath the damp moss. Someone had cut the flowering stem from a healthy orchid and grafted it onto a diseased rootstock. To an ordinary observer, it would appear that one of the Queen's plants had fallen ill under Marianne's care. But Marianne had never made this graft. Someone had manufactured the evidence against her. Outside, wheels rolled along the southern road. Marianne moved to the window and saw two covered wagons waiting behind the glasshouse. Men were loading the brass-bound cases containing the royal orchids. All 12 of them. Alistair stood beside the first wagon, while Lavinia supervised from the steps, the stolen key hanging from her wrist. Marianne closed her hand around the counterfeit flower. Her husband had already decided that she was guilty. By dawn, the only evidence capable of proving otherwise would be gone. Marianne crossed the lawn before the first wagon could move. If the orchids are contaminated, they must remain here until an independent botanist examines them. Alistair turned toward her. You are forbidden from interfering. Then ask Lavinia where she is taking them. To the Royal Conservatory, Lavinia answered. Marianne looked at the wagons. Royal botanical shipments were sealed with blue wax and accompanied by an inventory signed by a crown inspector. These carried neither. Where is the transport seal? Alistair glanced at the bare doors. Doubt briefly entered his expression. Lavinia stepped beside him. The paperwork will be completed in London. Must you let her question every decision you make? Marianne watched his uncertainty disappear. Let the wagons pass, he ordered. You know something is wrong. I know that you were removed from authority this morning. And you would rather lose the Queen's collection than admit you may have judged me too quickly. His face hardened. Move aside. Marianne obeyed. But as the second wagon passed, she noticed a chalk mark on its rear panel. B17. It belonged to Bellamy's warehouse near the Thames. A private exporter, not the Royal Conservatory. Lavinia was lying about the destination, and Alistair had just allowed her to remove the evidence. Marianne returned to the cottage and placed the counterfeit orchid beneath her lens. The graft was delicate, but the binding thread was ordinary greenhouse twine. Whoever prepared it had worked inside her glasshouse and used her materials. Clara was awake now, though still weak. Did you see the man beneath the furnace clearly? Marianne asked. The girl shook her head. Only his boots. The lady told him the other jars must be emptied before morning. Other jars? 3 of them, under a loose stone. Marianne did not ask Clara for more. The child needed rest, not another interrogation. Thomas offered to enter the glasshouse, but Marianne refused. If Lavinia catches you, your family could lose its farm. I will not make you pay for my husband's decision. Instead, she sent for Samuel Pike, the mason who had repaired the furnace the previous autumn. He arrived before dawn and recognized Clara's description immediately. There are 3 old drainage chambers beneath that floor, he said. Lady Lavinia paid me to open one 6 weeks ago. Did she say why? She claimed the Duke had approved new irrigation pipes. Alistair had been in Scotland 6 weeks earlier. Pike drew the altered system from memory. A narrow pipe ran from the hidden chamber into the cistern feeding the orchid benches, but not the medicinal garden. That would allow someone to damage the orchids without affecting any other plants, Marianne said. Pike's expression darkened. Then, the village remedies were never dangerous. No. Closing the infirmary only made the accusation against me appear more serious. She asked Pike to write and sign everything he remembered. His statement proved Lavinia had secretly altered the irrigation system, but it did not prove what she had placed beneath the floor, or why the orchids had been taken to Bellamy's warehouse. Hoofbeats sounded outside. A stable boy approached the cottage carrying a folded message. Alistair had ordered his fastest carriage prepared and intended to follow the wagons to London at sunrise. He may be going to inspect the shipment, Thomas said hopefully, or to protect Lavinia from questions. Marianne looked at the counterfeit orchid, Pike's statement, and the last few coins remaining in her purse. With her settlement suspended, she could not afford a proper carriage. Thomas explained that his brother's produce boat would leave through the estate canal within the hour and reach London by evening. Marianne placed the orchid in a specimen case and handed Pike's signed statement back to him. If I do not return within 3 days, take this directly to the magistrate. Do not give it to anyone employed by the Duke. She reached London shortly before nightfall and went first to the Royal Conservatory. Its superintendent confirmed that no orchids from Wycliffe Hall had been requested, nor had Lavinia received permission to transport them. That was enough to bring a customs officer to Bellamy's warehouse. Marianne did not enter secretly. She presented herself at the front door and demanded an official inspection of property belonging to the Crown. Bellamy, a heavy-set merchant with ink-stained fingers, insisted no royal plants were inside. Then Marianne saw damp soil scattered beside one of the loading doors. Mixed through it were fragments of the distinctive white clay pots commissioned for the Queen's collection. The customs officer ordered the warehouse opened. The orchids were gone. Only their empty cases remained. On Bellamy's desk lay a shipping ledger. 12 botanical specimens had been registered for export under Marianne's name, and the vessel carrying them would depart the following evening. Beside the entry was a second notation. Propagation records included. Payment to Lady L upon delivery. Before Marianne could copy it, carriage wheels stopped outside. Alistair entered with Lavinia and 2 officers. Lavinia looked at the open ledger, then at Marianne. "She has come to steal the orchids," she said. Marianne turned to her husband. He now had the destination lie, the missing royal seal, and Bellamy's record before him. This time, Alistair could not claim he had seen no reason to doubt his sister. Alistair approached Bellamy's desk and read the shipping ledger. "Who authorized this export?" Bellamy bowed stiffly. "The Duchess of Pembroke, Your Grace." "That is false," Marianne said. Bellamy opened a drawer and produced a folded contract. It authorized him to transport the orchids and sell selected propagation rights abroad. Marianne's name appeared beneath the terms, accompanied by a red wax impression resembling her personal seal. Alistair examined it in silence. Marianne did not need a magnifying lens to see the flaw. Her signature always ended with an upward stroke. This one curved downward. The seal was also too perfect. Genuine impressions from her old brass stamp carried a shallow crack across the left edge. "You know that is not my signature," she told Alistair, "and you have seen my seal often enough to recognize the missing flaw." His eyes remained on the document. Lavinia removed her gloves slowly. Marianne must have arranged the sale before the orchids became ill. When she realized the damage would be discovered, she accused me to protect herself. "Then why did you lie about taking them to the Royal Conservatory?" Marianne asked. "I feared you would interfere before they could be examined." "They were not sent for examination. Bellamy registered them for export." Bellamy stepped forward. "I acted upon a signed agreement. My clerk witnessed the Duchess deliver it." The clerk, a nervous young man standing near the door, nodded immediately. His answer came too quickly. Marianne turned to him. "When did I visit this warehouse?" 6 days ago. I was at Wycliffe Hall that entire day. The estate physician, my 2 assistants, and more than 20 tenants saw me treating an outbreak of fever." The clerk looked toward Bellamy before answering. "Perhaps it was another day." The customs officer frowned. "Your statement must be exact." Alistair placed the contract on the desk. For the first time, Marianne believed he might order a proper investigation. Then Lavinia spoke quietly beside him. "If this becomes public before the Queen's exhibition, the Pembroke name will be disgraced. Marianne knows that. She is relying upon your attachment to her to escape scrutiny." Marianne saw the familiar change in her husband. Doubt gave way to pride. "Where are the orchids now?" Alistair asked Bellamy. "Moved to secure storage after we learned the Duchess had entered London." "Which storage?" Bellamy hesitated. "I would prefer to provide that information directly to the authorities." Marianne faced Alistair. "Order him to reveal it. The plants belong to the Crown." "I no longer know what belongs to whom," he replied. "You know enough. Lavinia lied about their destination. Bellamy's witness cannot remember when I supposedly came here, and the signature before you is wrong. The contract still bears your name and seal. A counterfeit bearing my name is not evidence against me. It is evidence that must be examined. Then have it examined before you punish me again." The customs officer agreed. The document and ledger should be placed under seal until a magistrate can review them. Bellamy's confidence faltered. Alistair noticed, yet he did not order the merchant detained. Instead, he looked toward the 2 officers who had accompanied him. "My wife should remain in custody until the ownership of the shipment is established." Marianne stared at him. Lavinia had lied in front of him. Bellamy was withholding royal property. The clerk had contradicted himself, and Alistair had recognized the false stroke in Marianne's signature. Still, he chose the course that protected his judgment. One officer stepped toward her. "Alistair," Marianne said, "if you do this now, you will never be able to claim that you were merely deceived." His face tightened. "I am preventing further interference." "No, you are silencing the only person asking the questions you are afraid to answer." The officer took her arm. Marianne did not resist. Before leaving, she asked the customs officer to place the counterfeit contract, shipping ledger, and empty orchid cases under official seal. He agreed, and assigned a guard to the warehouse. That small protection was more than her husband had offered. As Marianne was led outside, she noticed several fragments of white clay caught in the grooves of Bellamy's loading cart. The soil clinging to them was pale and gritty, unlike the dark loam used at Wycliffe Hall. One fragment had fallen onto the street. She bent as though adjusting her shoe and wrapped it inside her handkerchief. Alistair followed her to the waiting carriage. "I will speak to the magistrate in the morning," he said. You had the power to stop this tonight. I am trying to determine the truth. You suspended my income before the plants were examined. You surrendered my notebooks before the accusation was proved. Now you are sending me into custody, while the man holding the Queen's orchids remains free. Alistair had no answer. At the watch house, Marianne was placed in a small private room, rather than a common cell. The concession did not soften the lock turning behind her. She unfolded the handkerchief and examined the broken pot beneath the lamp. The white clay had been made with powdered chalk. Embedded in the soil was a cluster of crushed blue shells, commonly used to reduce acidity in coastal nurseries. No such material existed in the soil at Wycliffe Hall. But Marianne knew one nursery that used it in every imported orchid bed. Bellamy owned that nursery. If the diseased roots had grown there, the orchids could not have been poisoned in Marianne's glasshouse. She finally possessed evidence that did not depend upon Alistair believing her. Then footsteps stopped outside her door. A key entered the lock, and Bellamy's clerk stepped into the room alone. "I lied about seeing you at the warehouse," he whispered. "But if Bellamy learns I told you why, neither of us will reach the magistrate alive." Bellamy's clerk closed the door behind him. "My name is Edward Shaw," he whispered. "Bellamy ordered me to say I saw you deliver the contract. Why did you obey him? My mother and sister live in a cottage he owns. He threatened to remove them before winter." Marianne understood his fear, but sympathy could not replace evidence. "Will you repeat this before the magistrate?" Edward lowered his eyes. "Not while Bellamy controls their home. Then tell me something that can be verified without your testimony." He hesitated before answering. "The diseased roots came from Bellamy's nursery near Dover. Lady Lavinia visited twice. She brought pages from your notebooks and asked the gardeners to reproduce the Queen's orchids. The shipping records, Bellamy keeps 2 ledgers. The official one is at the warehouse. The true accounts are kept at the nursery." Footsteps sounded in the corridor. Edward left before the watchman returned. The following morning, Marianne appeared before Magistrate Holloway. Alistair and Lavinia were already present, along with Bellamy and the customs officer. The counterfeit contract lay on the table. Marianne placed the broken pot beside it. "The soil contains chalk and crushed blue shells," she explained. "Neither is used at Wycliffe Hall. Bellamy's coastal nursery uses both to prepare beds for imported orchids." Bellamy shrugged. "Many nurseries use similar mixtures. Then an inspection will establish whether yours contains the matching plants, pots, and grafting materials." Before he could object, the door opened and Samuel Pike entered. He had traveled through the night with his signed statement and a drawing of the altered irrigation system. He testified that Lavinia had ordered a chamber opened beneath the glasshouse and installed a pipe leading only to the orchid cistern. Alistair had never approved the work. For the first time, Lavinia lost her composure. "A drainage repair proves nothing. It proves you altered the glasshouse in secret," Marianne replied. "Weeks before you accused me of contaminating it." Magistrate Holloway ordered Bellamy's nursery inspected and prohibited the remaining orchids from leaving England. Marianne was released pending the investigation, but the accusation against her remained active. Outside the court, Alistair approached her. "You should return to Wycliffe Hall under my protection. Your protection placed me in custody. I acted upon the evidence available. You ignored every piece that contradicted Lavinia. A messenger interrupted them with news from the estate. Clara's fever had worsened during the night, because the infirmary no longer possessed Marianne's prepared remedies. 2 other children had also been turned away." Alistair looked toward Lavinia. "You told me the medicines might be dangerous. They were produced under Marianne's supervision. The irrigation pipe did not reach the medicinal beds." Lavinia's silence gave him his answer. Marianne left at once. At Wycliffe Hall, she treated the sick children from the remaining herbs stored at her cottage. Clara's fever finally broke shortly before dawn. Alistair watched from the doorway as Thomas wept with relief. "This happened because of the order I signed," he said. "Yes, I believed I was protecting the estate." "You were protecting your pride. The estate paid the price." Later that morning, the magistrate's inspector arrived and placed the glasshouse under official supervision. Marianne was permitted to examine the plants and her research records. Several notebooks were missing. In the ones Lavinia had left behind, whole pages describing Marianne's propagation method had been carefully removed. Then Marianne opened the cabinet containing her experimental seeds. Every packet bore a new label written in Lavinia's hand. Marianne examined one and felt her pulse quicken. The seeds inside were not hers. They were cheap substitutes, placed there to make years of failed harvests appear inevitable. The orchids were only part of the theft. Lavinia intended to present Marianne's successful research as her own, and leave Marianne with nothing but ruined plants and records of failure. Marianne compared the substituted seeds with the labels in her surviving records. Lavinia had copied the names but overlooked Marianne's private numbering system, which recorded the year, parent plant, and field where each strain had been tested. The false packets carried labels for seeds that did not yet exist when the paper had been made. The inspector sealed the cabinet. "This suggests deliberate substitution," he said. "But it does not prove Lady Lavinia ordered it. Then we must find the missing research before she uses it." That afternoon, Magistrate Holloway's officers searched Bellamy's coastal nursery. The main office had been cleared, but the greenhouses still contained diseased rootstocks, white clay pots, and rolls of the same twine used in the counterfeit orchid. They also found crates addressed to Wycliffe Hall and an invoice for 12 healthy orchid stems delivered to Lavinia 6 weeks earlier. Bellamy claimed they were ordinary commercial plants. Marianne examined the cuttings and identified shallow marks beneath their stems. They matched the grafts found on the false royal orchid. "These were used to manufacture the diseased specimens," she said. The officers seized the nursery records, though Bellamy's private ledger was missing. Back at Wycliffe Hall, Alistair searched Lavinia's correspondence. Among her papers, he found an authorization bearing his own signature. It permitted her to purchase rare plants, hire private transport, and submit botanical work to the Queen's exhibition in the Pembroke name. Marianne read it once. "You gave her authority over my research before you accused me. Lavinia said the exhibition required one family representative, and you chose her. I believed she would present the work on behalf of the estate. She promised you a court appointment, did she not?" Alistair did not answer immediately. "If the Pembroke collection succeeded," he finally admitted, "I was to be considered for the Royal Agricultural Council." Marianne understood then. His betrayal had not begun with the dying orchids. He had already decided that her work mattered more as a path to his advancement than as something belonging to her. "You did not simply believe your sister," she said. "You benefited from believing her." A servant entered carrying a royal notice. The Queen's exhibition would open in 2 days. Because Marianne remained under investigation, she was forbidden from presenting any botanical work. Lady Lavinia Pembroke, however, had been accepted as the Pembroke estate's official representative. Attached to the notice was a description of Lavinia's principal exhibit, a new method for strengthening orchid roots and preserving rare specimens during transport. It was Marianne's method, the one contained in the missing pages. If Lavinia presented it before the Royal Council, the theft would become part of the public record. Marianne folded the notice. "I am going to the exhibition." Alistair looked at the restriction bearing the Queen's seal. "You will not be admitted. Then I will give the council a reason to summon me." She turned to the inspector. "Take 1 healthy orchid, 1 counterfeit plant, the substituted seeds, and every surviving notebook. Lavinia may repeat my conclusions, but she cannot explain how I reached them." For the first time since surrendering the key, Marianne was no longer trying to persuade her husband. She was preparing to prove the truth without him. On the morning of the exhibition, Magistrate Holloway's inspector presented the seized plants and records to the Royal Botanical Council. After examining the counterfeit orchid, the council postponed its judgment and formally summoned Marianne as a witness. She entered the conservatory under official escort, carrying her surviving notebooks. Lavinia stood beside a display of healthy orchids. Above them, a card announced, "A new Pembroke method for the preservation and propagation of rare orchids, presented by Lady Lavinia Pembroke." Alistair stood among the invited nobles. When Marianne entered, several guests whispered. News of her arrest had already reached London. The council chairman addressed Lavinia. "Before we consider the Duchess's accusation, explain how your treatment strengthens damaged roots." Lavinia repeated several sentences taken almost word for word from Marianne's notes. "Yes." Her voice remained confident until the chairman pointed toward 2 unlabeled plants. "Which specimen received the mineral treatment?" Lavinia hesitated. "The second." "It was the first," Marianne said. Lavinia turned sharply. "You were not asked." The chairman raised a hand. "The Duchess may continue." Marianne approached the table. "The treated plant has darker root tips and a new growth node beneath the lowest leaf. The second plant was watered too heavily and is beginning to rot." The chairman examined both and nodded. Marianne then placed the counterfeit orchid beside Lavinia's display. She removed the moss and exposed the binding thread joining a healthy stem to diseased roots. "These plants did not become ill through my treatment. They were assembled to appear as though they had." Lavinia's composure began to crack. That proves only that someone altered them. Then explain this. Marianne opened one of her surviving notebooks. Every successful seed line had been marked with a private numerical code. The same numbers appeared on Lavinia's display labels. The first number records the year of pollination. The second identifies the parent plant. The third records the tenant field where the soil was tested. She pointed to one label. What does this code mean? Lavinia stared at it. No answer came. It means you copied marks you did not understand, Marianne said. The inspector presented the invoice found at Bellamy's nursery, along with samples of the coastal soil and white clay pots. The materials matched those recovered from the counterfeit plants. Finally, the council examined the authorization signed by Alistair. The chairman looked toward him. Your Grace, did you give Lady Lavinia permission to obtain plants, transport the royal collection, and submit this research? Alistair rose slowly. I did. Did Duchess Marianne approve? No. Were you aware the work was hers? The conservatory fell silent. Alistair looked at Marianne. She offered him no rescue. Yes, he admitted. I knew she had developed the method. The admission spread through the room in a low murmur. Lavinia stepped away from the display. My brother authorized everything done in the Pembroke name. If there was misconduct, I did not act alone. You secretly altered the irrigation system, Alistair said. You gave me control of it. You forged Marianne's signature. You gave Bellamy access to her records and ordered the servants to obey me. Each answer revealed another decision Alistair had concealed. The council chairman ordered Lavinia's display closed and suspended the Pembroke estate from the competition. Marianne's accusation would be investigated fully, but her name was not yet cleared. Bellamy's true ledger and the missing research pages remained unaccounted for. As officers prepared to escort Lavinia from the conservatory, Edward Shaw appeared at the entrance. He was pale, and one side of his face was bruised. I can tell you where Bellamy's private ledger is, he said, but it contains more than payments to Lady Lavinia. Edward looked directly at Alistair. It also records what the Duke expected to receive after his wife's work was presented under the Pembroke name. Edward Shaw was brought before the council and placed under the protection of the magistrate. Bellamy promised Lady Lavinia that the exhibition would secure the Duke's appointment, he said. His Grace was never told about the false plants or forged contract, but he knew the Duchess's research would be presented without her consent. Alistair did not deny it. Edward explained that Bellamy's true ledger was hidden inside a locked cash box at his London lodging. Officers recovered it within the hour. The entries recorded payments for the coastal nursery, the replacement plants, the altered irrigation system, and the transport of Marianne's notebooks. Beside several expenses appeared the initials LP. A separate page described the expected rewards. Lavinia would receive a share of the foreign sale. Bellamy would acquire the right to distribute the new orchid treatment. Alistair would be recommended for the Royal Agricultural Council. The chairman looked at Alistair. Did you know Bellamy intended to sell the method abroad? No. Did you know Lady Lavinia would claim responsibility for developing it? Alistair hesitated. I knew Marianne's name would not appear. A murmur passed through the chamber. Marianne watched him closely. This was the moment he had avoided since the morning he took her key. Alistair rose. I did not know the plants had been falsified, but ignorance does not excuse what I did know. Lavinia promised that the Pembroke name would receive royal recognition if I gave her control of the Glasshouse. He looked toward the council rather than Marianne. I signed the transport authority without consulting my wife. I allowed her notebooks to be taken. I suspended Marianne's settlement so she could not challenge my decision, and when I saw evidence that her signature had been forged, I still permitted her arrest, because admitting my error would have exposed my ambition. Lavinia stared at him. You would condemn your own sister? No, Alistair replied. I am finally refusing to condemn my wife for decisions I made. His confession was entered into the official record. The council restored Marianne's right to speak in her own defense, and suspended Alistair's expected appointment. However, the ledger alone could not establish that Lavinia had ordered the fraud. Her initials appeared throughout, but they might have been added by Bellamy. Lavinia seized upon the weakness immediately. My brother has admitted that he authorized the purchases and transport. Bellamy could have carried out the substitutions without my knowledge. You commissioned the hidden chamber, Marianne said, to repair the drainage. You presented my work as your own, because Alistair gave me authority to represent the estate. The council chairman turned to Edward. Did you personally witness Lady Lavinia order the false plants? No, sir. Bellamy gave those instructions. Did you see her sign an agreement? Edward shook his head. Bellamy was brought into the chamber under guard. Faced with his ledger, he admitted preparing the counterfeit contract and arranging the foreign sale. But he claimed Lavinia had never known the orchids were false. She believed I was transporting healthy specimens, he said. Lavinia looked almost relieved. Marianne understood at once. Bellamy was protecting her, because his ledger did not contain the one document capable of proving their agreement. "Where is the original export order?" Marianne asked. Bellamy said nothing. Every legitimate overseas shipment required 3 copies, one for the exporter, one for customs, and one for the shipping company. Bellamy might destroy his copy, but he could not erase all 3. Marianne turned to the customs officer. "Which company accepted the orchids?" "Mercer and Sons." "Then their archive will contain the remaining order." The officer left immediately. He returned near sunset, carrying an empty folder. The company's copy had been removed that morning by someone using a written authorization from the Duke of Pembroke. Alistair examined the signature. "This one is genuine," he said. Marianne looked at him. Only 3 people had access to his private correspondence desk: Alistair, his secretary, and Lavinia. Alistair read the authorization again. "I signed this 3 weeks ago," he admitted. "Lavinia said she needed permission to collect documents relating to the exhibition. So you gave her access without asking which documents?" Marianne said. "Yes." The company clerk was questioned next. He confirmed that Lavinia had personally collected the export order that morning. She had signed for it in Mercer and Sons' bound delivery book. The entry could not be removed without damaging the page. Lavinia examined her signature and remained calm. "I collected a Pembroke document using authority my brother gave me. That proves no crime." "No," Marianne said, "but it proves you knew which record could expose you." The customs officer then produced the port registry. Unlike the missing company copy, its entries had been written directly into a bound volume. The record listed 12 orchids, copies of Marianne's propagation notes, and the foreign buyer's payment. Bellamy was named as exporter. Lavinia was named as the person entitled to receive 1/3 of the proceeds. Her signature appeared beneath the terms. "This could have been forged," she said. Marianne placed the counterfeit contract beside the registry. "The false signature made in my name curves downward, because the writer naturally finishes her own name that way. Your signature in the port registry ends with the same downward movement." A handwriting examiner compared them. The pressure, spacing, and final stroke were consistent with the same hand. Lavinia had forged Marianne's name herself. Officers searched the London residence where she had stayed before the exhibition. In a locked writing case, they found the pages cut from Marianne's notebooks, correspondence with Bellamy, and an early draft of the false contract. The evidence established the entire scheme. Lavinia had arranged for healthy orchid stems to be grafted onto diseased roots grown at Bellamy's nursery. She then used the hidden irrigation pipe to damage the genuine plants and make Marianne appear careless. Once Alistair transferred control of the Glasshouse, she removed the healthy collection, stole the propagation method, and prepared to sell both abroad. Bellamy had provided the forged shipping papers and false witness. In return, Lavinia promised him exclusive commercial rights to Marianne's work. The chairman turned to her. "Do you deny that these letters are yours?" Lavinia looked at Alistair rather than the council. "You allowed Marianne everything I was denied," she said. "Land, research, respect. I was expected to live upon my brother's generosity while she built a name of her own." "You could have built something without destroying me," Marianne replied. "With what authority?" "The same determination you used to steal mine." Lavinia's resentment explained her motive, but it did not excuse her choices. The council ordered her held for fraud, forgery, theft of royal property, and conspiracy with Bellamy. Bellamy faced additional charges for illegal export and false testimony. Marianne's arrest order was revoked. The council formally recognized her as the creator of the propagation method and restored her position in the exhibition. Then the chairman addressed Alistair. "Your sister's fraud succeeded because you gave her control over your wife's work, silenced objections, and used financial power to prevent the Duchess from defending herself." Alistair lowered his head. "I accept that. Acceptance is not restitution." The council suspended him from all royal appointments and placed the botanical holdings of Wycliffe Hall under temporary supervision. Marianne requested one further condition. "My husband accused me before the tenants whose medicine and harvests depended upon my work." "The correction must be made before those same people," the chairman agreed. A public hearing would take place at Wycliffe Hall, on the lawn where Marianne had been forced to surrender her key. Before leaving the chamber, Alistair approached her. "I will return everything I took." You cannot return the trust you destroyed by signing another document. What then do you require of me? The truth, Marianne said, spoken without excuses, before every person you invited to witness my humiliation. For the first time, Alistair understood that clearing her name would also require him to ruin his own. The same tenants, gardeners, and servants were summoned to the south lawn of Wycliffe Hall. This time, Marianne stood at the top of the Glasshouse steps. Alistair stood below her. Representatives of the Royal Botanical Council attended beside Magistrate Holloway and 2 Crown solicitors. Several London newspapers had also sent correspondence. Alistair held the brass key he had once forced Marianne to surrender. My wife did not poison the Queen's orchids, he began. She did not endanger the village, falsify her records, or arrange the illegal sale of the collection. His voice carried across the silent lawn. I knew her work had not been independently examined, yet I punished her, before the accusation was proved. I suspended her settlement so she could not hire a solicitor. I gave her notebooks and Glasshouse to my sister, because Lavinia promised that Marianne's work would secure me a royal appointment. Thomas Reed stood near the front, with Clara beside him. Alistair looked toward them. When the infirmary destroyed Marianne's remedies, children suffered because of an order I authorized. When evidence showed that the shipping contract was forged, I still allowed my wife to be detained, because admitting my mistake mattered less to me than protecting my authority. No one interrupted him. My sister deceived me, but she did not force me to disregard my wife. Those choices were mine. He signed the public correction. Copies were given to the royal secretary and newspaper correspondents. Then, one of the Crown solicitors presented a revised settlement. It restored every payment withheld from Marianne, with interest from Alistair's personal income. It granted her sole legal control of the Glasshouse, its research, and all future proceeds from her botanical work. Alistair could no longer dismiss her assistants, seize her records, restrict her travel, or interfere with the village infirmary. The estate would also compensate every worker and tenant harmed by the closure. Alistair extended the key. Marianne did not take it. A key is not independence if you may reclaim it whenever your pride is wounded. You have read the settlement, he said. The authority is yours. Not yet. She pointed to a final clause allowing the Duke to reclaim the botanical grounds if they were judged financially burdensome to the estate. Alistair looked toward his solicitor. Remove it. The solicitor crossed out the clause, added a prohibition against future seizure, and asked both parties to initial the amendment. Marianne read the complete document once more before signing. Only then did she accept the key. The tenants began to applaud, quietly at first, then with growing force. Marianne raised one hand, and the lawn fell silent again. The Glasshouse will reopen, she said, but it will not return to what it was. Her assistants would be rehired with higher wages. The medicinal beds would supply neighboring villages as well as Wycliffe. Every experiment would be witnessed, copied, and preserved, so no single person could alter the record again. Thomas Reed would supervise distribution to the infirmary. Samuel Pike would rebuild the irrigation system under independent inspection. And the research? One council member asked. It will belong to an institute governed by a public charter, not to the Pembroke name. Alistair understood what that meant. Even though the Glasshouse stood on his estate, its work would never again increase his personal authority. I will provide the land required for the charter, he said. That is restitution, Marianne replied, not generosity. He accepted the correction. After the hearing, the lawn gradually emptied. Marianne remained beside the Glasshouse while the gardeners removed Lavinia's labels and restored her original records. Alistair approached without the servants or solicitors. Your rooms at Wycliffe Hall are ready, he said. I will remain at the Dower Cottage. For how long? I do not know. Pain crossed his face. Is there anything I can do to change that? There are many things you must do. Restore the infirmary, pay the workers, protect Edward Shaw's family, cooperate fully in Lavinia's prosecution. And after that? Marianne looked at the key in her hand. After that, you will have repaired part of the damage. You will not have purchased forgiveness. A royal messenger arrived before Alistair could answer. He carried the proposed charter for Marianne's new institute and a personal invitation from the Queen. The Crown was offering Marianne permanent authority over the royal orchid collection, but accepting the position required her to leave Wycliffe Hall for London before the end of the month. Alistair read the condition over her shoulder. Marianne folded the letter. For the first time in her marriage, the future did not depend upon what her husband permitted. It depended entirely upon what she chose. Marianne accepted the Queen's appointment. She left for London before the end of the month, taking her assistants, surviving notebooks, and the healthy orchids with her. She did not ask Alistair's permission, nor did he attempt to give it. At the Royal Conservatory, Marianne spent the winter restoring the damaged collection and documenting the method Lavinia had tried to steal. Her work was published under her full name, and every false accusation issued against her was formally withdrawn. The trials concluded the following spring. Bellamy's ledgers, Edward Shaw's testimony, and the port records proved that he had organized the false export, manufactured the forged contract, and attempted to sell property belonging to the Crown. His warehouses and nursery were seized, partly to compensate his employees and the buyers he had defrauded. Lavinia was convicted of forgery, theft, destruction of research, and conspiracy to export the royal collection. She lost her allowance and every administrative claim over the Pembroke estate. Her resentment had explained why she targeted Marianne, but the court refused to treat it as an excuse. Alistair testified against both of them without requesting leniency for his sister. His own punishment was different. He retained his title, but the Crown barred him from royal agricultural appointments. He repaid Marianne's withheld settlement with interest, funded the restoration of the village infirmary, compensated the dismissed workers, and provided permanent housing for Edward Shaw's family. Those actions repaired material damage. They did not restore his marriage. Alistair moved into a smaller house on the northern edge of the estate, while Marianne remained in London. His letters contained reports rather than pleas. The infirmary had reopened, the workers had been paid, and no decision concerning the botanical grounds had been made without the Institute's trustees. Marianne answered only when necessary. One letter differed from the rest. I admired your intelligence when it reflected well upon me, and punished it when it challenged me. Lavinia exploited my ambition, but she did not create it. I will not ask you to ease my guilt by calling restitution forgiveness. Marianne folded the letter and placed it with the official record. She did not destroy it, but she did not answer it either. 6 months later, she returned to Wycliffe Hall for the opening of the new Botanical Institute. The old Glasshouse had not been rebuilt exactly as it was. Marianne had commissioned 2 connected buildings, a public conservatory for research and a medicinal nursery supplying villages throughout the county. Above the entrance appeared the name, the Marianne Pembroke Botanical Institute. Its charter placed the land, research, and income under an independent board. Neither Alistair nor any future duke could seize its records or dismiss its staff. Thomas Reed became steward of the medicinal gardens. Samuel Pike supervised the new irrigation system, ensuring that every channel could be inspected. Clara, fully recovered, visited the institute each afternoon and had already learned to identify 4 kinds of orchid root. The Queen attended the opening with members of the Royal Botanical Council. Alistair stood at the back among the guests, holding no official place. After the ceremony, he approached Marianne beneath the new glass roof. You built it again, he said. No, I built what it should always have been. Near the entrance, the original brass key rested inside a glass case. Beside it hung 6 new keys assigned to the Institute's senior gardeners, researchers, and trustees. Alistair studied them. I once made you surrender that key before the entire estate, and now no single person controls the door. He looked at her. May I visit the Institute? As a patron of the infirmary, when your responsibilities require it. And as your husband? Marianne met his gaze without anger, but also without softness, intended to comfort him. We will continue to live separately. Forever? I will not promise forgiveness before trust exists. If anything between us changes, it will be because of years of conduct, not one confession, one letter, or one public apology. Pain crossed his face, but he bowed. I understand. For once, he did not ask her to soften the consequence of his choice. After he left, Clara ran toward Marianne, carrying the first orchid propagated entirely within the new institute. Its ivory petals were unmarked, and its roots were strong. Where should we put it? Clara asked. Marianne unlocked the public conservatory. Somewhere everyone can see it. Together, they carried the orchid through the open doors.